When we talk about bringing Barakah back into our lives, it always begins in the same place, the heart. Everything in our spiritual journey begins with intention, not the intention we casually claim, but the intention we quietly carry. The intention that sits behind our choices, our habits, and our direction in life. Barakah doesn't simply fall upon actions, it falls upon sincerity. And sincerity is born when you pause long enough to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Who am I doing this for? Most of us go through life on autopilot, repeating routines, fulfilling expectations, chasing deadlines, and responding to noise. But when the heart is not awake, even our worship can become mechanical actions without presence, words without weight. Real transformation begins the moment you realign your intention with purpose. When your heart says, I want Allah to be part of this, that's when Barakah starts to seep into what you do. This is why the early generations used to reflect deeply before doing anything. They understood that intention is the spiritual engine that either propels an action toward divine acceptance or leaves it empty. You could perform the smallest deed, but if the intention behind it is sincere, Allah magnifies it in ways you could never predict. And you could perform grand actions that impress the world, but if the intention is skewed, the impact vanishes as quickly as it appeared. Realigning your intention doesn't require a dramatic ritual. It requires honesty. It requires slowing down and giving yourself permission to ask the deeper questions we often avoid. What drives my decisions? What am I hoping to gain? Am I seeking validation, or am I seeking closeness to Allah? And if I'm being fully transparent with myself, how much of what I do is shaped by fear, comparison, habit, or expectation, rather than faith and conviction? Once you start having those conversations with yourself, you will notice something remarkable. The heart becomes lighter. It becomes clearer. And clarity is one of the first signs of Barakah returning. When your intention is anchored in sincerity, your choices start to feel aligned again. You stop trying to please every voice around you, and you start prioritizing the one voice that matters most. You stop measuring your life by the standards of others and start measuring it by the standard of purpose. In that shift, even your challenges begin to make sense. Even your struggles start teaching you. Barakah is not only the increase of ease, it's the increase of meaning, wisdom, and perspective. When your intention is in the right place, your daily actions take on a new fragrance. You wake up differently, not dragged by obligation, but pulled by purpose. You work differently, not out of worldly pressure alone, but out of spiritual value. You speak with more kindness, because your heart is conscious. You forgive more quickly because you see the bigger picture. You give more generously because you know that whatever you lose for Allah's sake is never truly lost. This is why intention is such a powerful internal reset. It does not change your circumstances immediately, but it changes the way you move through them, and that change invites Barakah. And when you finally reach that point where your intention aligns with your purpose, life stops feeling like something you're trying to control and starts feeling like something you're trying to fulfill. You begin to understand that the goal is not perfection. The goal is sincerity. The goal is not to impress. The goal is to be real with your Creator. Once the heart is sincere, Barakah comes sometimes in ways you see immediately, and other times in ways you only recognize years later. But it always comes, because Barakah begins where sincerity begins. One of the most overlooked truths about Barakah is that it rarely appears in a life that is drowning in excess. Barakah settles where there is space in the mind, in the heart, and even in the physical environment. We live in a world that constantly pushes us toward more. More commitments, more possessions, more noise, more tasks, more distractions. And without realizing it, we end up crowding our lives so tightly that there's no room left for blessing to enter. The heart becomes overwhelmed, the schedule becomes suffocating, and the inner voice that once guided us becomes buried beneath layers of constant stimulation. Simplicity is not about having less for the sake of deprivation. It's about creating room for what actually matters. Barakah flourishes in the spaces where unnecessary clutter has been removed. Think about your own life. How many things do you carry that drain you rather than nourish you? How many habits, commitments, or possessions consume your time, your mental energy, and your emotional bandwidth, while adding nothing of real value? When everything feels heavy, it's a sign that your life is too full of things that don't serve your soul. There is a reason why the Prophet let RFDFA lived with profound simplicity. It wasn't because he couldn't have more. It was because he understood that too much of the world can suffocate the spirit. When your surroundings are cluttered, your mind becomes cluttered. When your schedule is overcrowded, your heart becomes overstretched. And when your attention is constantly divided, the tranquility that Barakah brings becomes harder to experience. Many people spend their lives chasing peace, not realizing that peace often arrives only after you have the courage to let go. Letting go begins with honesty. What in your life feels more like weight than worth? What habits do you maintain out of social pressure rather than genuine benefit? What digital distractions do you cling to despite knowing they steal your time? What relationships constantly pull you into negativity or drain your emotional capacity? Simplifying your life isn't about withdrawing from the world. It's about clearing the path so you can walk through it with purpose. And it's remarkable how quickly the soul responds when simplicity returns. When you put your phone away for a while, the mind becomes clearer. When you declutter your space, suddenly you feel lighter. When you cut down unnecessary commitments, time expands. When you step away from constant comparison, gratitude begins to grow. Barakah is not only the blessing of increase, it's also the blessing of ease. And ease cannot exist in a life that is constantly overloaded. Sometimes simplifying your life requires uncomfortable decisions. It may require you to say no more often. It may require you to walk away from certain environments, limit certain influences, or stop doing things just because you've always done them. It may require you to recalibrate your expectations of yourself. But with every layer you remove, you create more space for Barakah to flow. And simplicity is not only external, it is deeply internal. A simple heart is a heart free from envy, from resentment, from constant worry about perceptions, from relentless comparison. A heart like that becomes fertile ground for Barakah because it is not choked by spiritual weeds. When you quiet the internal noise, you can finally hear what Allah is guiding you toward. When your mind isn't scattered, you can finally see what truly deserves your energy. And when your heart is calm, even the smallest blessing feels magnified. Barakah enters most naturally into a life that is intentionally spacious, not empty, not passive, but spacious enough to welcome meaning, spacious enough to welcome stillness, spacious enough to welcome divine increase. The more you simplify, the more you notice the blessings that were always there but buried beneath the noise. And that is why Barakah thrives where simplicity lives. If we truly want Barakah to return to our lives, we have to begin by strengthening the single most important relationship we will ever have: our relationship with Allah. Barakah is not something you manufacture through technique or strategy. It is something Allah places in your life out of His mercy. And the more connected you are to Him, the more naturally that blessing flows. Many of us look for solutions everywhere except the one place that actually brings clarity. We look to productivity hacks, motivational quotes, new routines, new habits, new systems, yet the heart still feels scattered, tired, or empty. That emptiness is not a lack of effort, it is a lack of connection. There is something profoundly transformative about standing before Allah in prayer with presence. Not the rushed prayer we sometimes fall into, where our lips move but our hearts are somewhere else, but the kind of prayer that invites your soul back home. When your prayer becomes alive, everything else in your life begins to come alive as well. The Prophet described prayer as a source of comfort, not obligation, because real connection brings real peace. And when the heart finds peace, Barakah becomes possible again. The same is true with the Quran. There is a difference between reading the Quran to finish a page and reading the Quran to nourish your heart. When you recite it with reflection, it becomes a mirror that shows you your strengths, your weaknesses, your priorities, your distractions, your hopes, and your fears. It realigns you without you even noticing. It softens you when life has hardened you. It grounds you when the world has overwhelmed you. It reminds you of who you are, and more importantly, of who Allah is. And when your understanding of Allah deepens, your trust in Him strengthens. With trust comes calmness, and with calmness comes barakah. The Hikr too has a unique way of transforming the heart. These are simple words, often small in number, but heavy in meaning. They anchor you. They create a rhythm in your day that keeps you spiritually awake. The more you remember Allah, the more your heart stays aware of Him. And the more your heart stays aware of Him, the more naturally blessing settles around you. The Hikr is not only a practice, it's a state of being. It teaches you to live with consciousness rather than distraction, with gratitude rather than entitlement, with humility rather than arrogance. When you strengthen your connection with Allah, you begin to notice something subtle. Your perspective shifts. Things that once seemed chaotic start to make sense. Situations that once felt heavy begin to feel manageable. Decisions that once confused you become clearer. Barakah is not only the blessing of increase, it is also the blessing of clarity. And clarity is a gift that Allah gives to those who seek Him sincerely. Even your struggles begin to carry a different weight. They no longer feel like punishment. They feel like part of a greater plan. You begin to see the wisdom in your obstacles, the lessons in your discomfort, and the growth in your delays. When Allah is close to you, the world doesn't become easier, but your heart becomes stronger. And that inner strength is one of the greatest forms of barakah. The truth is simple. The closer you are to Allah, the more your life aligns with what He wants for you. And when your life aligns with His guidance, barakah follows naturally, effortlessly, and abundantly. Because barakah flows wherever the heart is connected. One of the greatest signs that barakah has left a person's life is when time starts to slip through their fingers. Hours disappear without meaning, days pass without fulfillment. Weeks go by and we look back wondering what we actually accomplished. And yet, every single one of us is given the same 24 hours. The difference is not in the quantity of time we have, but in the quality of how we honor it. Time is one of the most sacred trusts Allah has given us, and when we treat it casually, we lose barakah. But when we honor it, guard it, and use it with intention, Allah places blessing in every moment. Most people don't even realize how much of their time is lost not through major distractions, but through small, repeated habits that quietly chip away at their day. The constant scrolling, the mindless browsing, the rushed mornings, the late nights, the lack of routine. These small cracks eventually drain the soul. Barakah isn't found in chaos. Barakah settles in the hearts of those who value the moments Allah gives them. If you want increase, you must first show that you appreciate what you already have. Everything changes when you begin guarding your mornings. There is something deeply spiritual about the early hours, something almost sacred. This is the time when the world is quiet, when the distractions haven't begun, when the heart is the most receptive. If you start your day with purpose, the rest of the day follows that rhythm. Too many of us begin our mornings reacting instead of reacting to notifications, messages, schedules, obligations. But a morning grounded in prayer, in gratitude, in presence sets the tone for Barakah to enter the hours that follow. And it's not only about waking up early, it's about waking up intentionally. Your mindset at dawn influences your mindset until dusk. When your first act of the day is turning to Allah, you are declaring through your actions, "My time is yours, my day is yours, my success is yours." That type of devotion realigns the heart. It draws divine support. It invites barakah into your efforts. When you begin to honor your time, you also start saying no to things that dilute it. Not everything deserves your attention. Not everyone deserves immediate access to your energy. When you learn to prioritize, you protect both your peace and your productivity. Many people think being busy is a sign of importance, but in reality, constant busyness often signals a lack of clarity. Barakah is not found in doing more. It's found in doing what matters with sincerity. Time management in Islam is not about squeezing more tasks into your day. It's about expanding the blessing in the tasks you already have. Sometimes Allah puts so much barakah in your efforts that what takes others hours takes you minutes. And sometimes, without barakah, you can spend an entire day working and end up with nothing meaningful to show for it. The difference is not in your effort alone. It is in the spiritual state behind that effort. And perhaps one of the most beautiful signs of barakah in time is that Allah grants you the ability to be fully present. You're not living in regret of yesterday or anxiety of tomorrow. You're grounded in the moment Allah has placed you in. Presence itself is barakah because it allows you to experience life with depth instead of rushing through it without awareness. Time is life. Every moment that passes is a piece of you that returns to Allah. And when you start treating your time as a trust, Allah returns that respect with blessing, with clarity, with ease, and with expansion. Because barakah fills the time of those who honor it. One of the most powerful and mysterious ways barakah enters a person's life is through giving. Not giving when life is comfortable and the heart is full. Anyone can do that. Real barakah comes when you give even in moments when you feel you don't have much to offer, when your resources feel tight, when your schedule feels stretched, when your heart feels heavy, yet you still choose generosity. That kind of giving has a spiritual weight to it. It transforms not only the person who receives, but even more so, the person who gives. It's easy to think of charity as something financial, something transactional, something limited to a specific amount we set aside. But in reality, giving is far broader and far deeper. You can give through your time, your presence, your encouragement, your kindness, your forgiveness, your empathy, your prayers. You can give through a smile, through a listening ear, through a sincere moment of compassion. Allah has made generosity accessible to every soul. And the beauty of giving is that it's not measured by quantity, but by sincerity. A small act given with a pure heart carries more weight in the sight of Allah than a large act done for recognition or praise. There is a spiritual law that Allah has placed in this world. Whatever you give for His sake, He returns it to you in ways you could never expect. Sometimes He returns it as ease in a difficulty, sometimes as unexpected provision, sometimes as clarity, sometimes as protection from harm you never even saw, and sometimes He returns it as inner peace, one of the greatest forms of barakah. So many people chase happiness, not realizing that happiness often comes from being the source of happiness for someone else. But giving requires a subtle shift in the heart. It requires moving away from the mindset of scarcity and embracing the mindset of trust. Scarcity tells you, if I give, I'll have less. Trust tells you, if I give, Allah will replace it with something better. Scarcity makes you hold tightly to what you have. Trust teaches you to open your hand so Allah can fill it. Barakah cannot coexist with a heart that is constantly afraid of losing, but it thrives in a heart that knows the one who gives, the one who sustains, the one who multiplies. And sometimes the greatest acts of generosity are not financial at all. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give is forgiveness, letting go of a grudge, releasing resentment, choosing peace over ego. These are acts that invite barakah into your life in profound ways. When you forgive someone, you don't just free them, you free yourself. You open a door in your heart that allows blessing, calmness, and healing to enter. A heart that carries bitterness cannot carry barakah at the same time. One must leave for the other to enter. Giving can also be the act of helping someone in silence, without seeking acknowledgement. Many of the most blessed moments in a believer's life come from deeds that no one else ever knew about. When you do something purely for Allah, with no eye watching, no ear listening, and no praise expected, that sincerity becomes a magnet for divine blessing. These are the deeds that illuminate your life in the unseen, long before you see their impact in the physical world. And the beautiful irony is that sometimes when you give, you might feel lighter even if your circumstances haven't changed. That is a sign of barakah, because barakah is not always about growing what's in your hand. It's often about expanding what's in your heart. A generous heart is a heart that Allah fills with contentment, strength, and purpose. The truth is simple: the more you give, the more you grow. And with every sincere act of generosity, you open another door for barakah to enter your life, because barakah increases for those who increase others. If there is one thing we often underestimate, it is how deeply our environment shapes our spiritual state. Barakah does not grow in just any atmosphere. It grows in environments that nourish the heart, elevate the mind, and remind the soul of its purpose. Every one of us is influenced by the people we sit with, the conversations we consume, the content we scroll through, the routines we build, and even the unseen energy of the spaces we occupy. If we surround ourselves with negativity, noise, and distraction, we cannot expect our hearts to feel calm, focused, or blessed. But when the environment shifts, the heart shifts with it. Think for a moment about the people you spend the most time with. Do they bring you closer to Allah or pull you further away? Do they encourage growth or feed stagnation? Do they elevate your standards or lower them? Sometimes barakah is not absent because you are doing something wrong, but because you are connected to people who drain you spiritually, emotionally, or mentally without you realizing it. Our companions are reflections of our direction. If you want your direction to be aligned with purpose, you must be intentional about who walks with you. And it's not only people. Even the routines you build become part of your environment. If your daily life is filled with habits that distract you, overstimulate you, or distance you from Allah, then barakah will naturally feel far away. But when you create routines that bring you closer to mindfulness, to presence, to remembrance, you begin to notice that your entire spiritual ecosystem starts to shift. Something subtle awakens inside you. Something begins to settle. That settling is barakah. Your physical space matters too. A cluttered home creates a cluttered mind. A chaotic room often mirrors a chaotic heart, and a space filled with distractions rarely invites stillness. When you take the time to create a space that brings you tranquility, clean, calm, organized, purposeful, you are not just cleaning your room, you are preparing a place for barakah to descend. Even small changes, a corner dedicated to Quran recitation, a quiet spot for reflection, a habit of keeping your environment tidy, can profoundly influence your spiritual focus. Our digital environment is another space we almost never consider, yet it heavily shapes our hearts. What you consume online becomes part of your inner world. If your feeds are filled with comparison, drama, anger, and endless distractions, that energy seeps into your thoughts and emotions. But when you fill your digital space with reminders, beneficial knowledge, uplifting content, and inspiration, your heart starts to breathe again. Barakah rarely exists in a heart that is constantly overstimulated, but it thrives in a heart that is nurtured with wisdom and protected from noise. Sometimes bringing Barakah back into your life requires stepping away from environments you've become comfortable with, even if they are familiar. Comfort does not always mean benefit. Growth often requires distance from negative company, from toxic routines, from draining commitments, from environments that darken the heart more than they illuminate it. And letting go is not always easy, but the moment you create space for better company, better routines, and better influences, Allah fills that space with something far more meaningful than what you left behind. And above all, remember that environment is not only external, it is internal. The state of your heart becomes the environment through which you experience everything else. When your heart is filled with resentment, Barakah feels distant. When your heart is filled with gratitude, Barakah feels near. When your heart is consumed with fear or comparison, it becomes constricted. But when your heart is filled with trust and sincerity, it expands. The most important environment you cultivate is the one inside you. Surround yourself with people who remind you of Allah, with routines that ground you, with spaces that calm you, with content that uplifts you, with habits that purify you, and you will see how naturally Barakah begins to return. Because Barakah grows wherever the environment invites it,